Okay, thank you all for coming. We're going to get started. My name is Mary Flores. Before I do anything, I want to make sure everyone knows that today's event is recorded and it's going to be posted on the GLUNA website. So that's a warning that if you don't want your face gracing our cover, that you might want to turn your video off, but we would love your face to be there. Also, we're going to be muting everybody, just keep the audio clear. And then the last thing is if you find yourself having technical difficulties with Zoom, there's going to be a live stream YouTube link that you can click on to watch. So I am a returned Peace Corps Guatemala, or Peace Corps volunteer from Guatemala from 88 to 91. And because of the Peace Corps goals, there's never an ex-Peace Corps volunteer. We are all returned Peace Corps volunteers. So that's why you won't hear anybody ever say I'm an ex-Peace Corps volunteer. We always are one. As a proud GLUNA board member, I'm happy to greet you and welcome you to our Java Cafe during our Peace Quest month and introduce our wonderful RPCV, our Returned Peace Corps volunteer speakers today. To me, there's no better fit than the Peace Corps and the United Nations. Both organizations work really hard to bring people together and promote peace in our world, and I'm proud to be a member of both of them. So please go to the GLUNA website, that's just GLUNA, for a calendar of all our Peace Corps events, our Peace Quest events throughout the month of September, because we have a number of fun things to do. On a personal note, the Peace Corps is really the best decision I ever made in my life. It shaped me and it gave me a beautiful perspective on the world. It also fed my spirit that I can make a difference in the world. So today I have the privilege of introducing you to 4 returned Peace Corps volunteers that'll give their perspective on what the Peace Corps means to them. When you have questions at the end of their presentations, you can either raise your hand during the Q&A or you can put your questions in the chat. And also, we are going to have contact information at the end for the local Peace Corps recruiting office, the office that I was recruited out of on MSU's campus, on the screen for anyone that's interested in more information. So let's start with my friend Dan Yates. 1 minute. So my friend Dan served 4 years in the Navy after high school. He received a MS in geology from West Virginia University. He then from 88 to 90, he served in the town next to my town of Guatemala with the U.S. Peace Corps to promote agroforestry techniques, to prevent erosion and loss of soil, to protect watershed areas, and to serve as windbreaks, boundaries, and a source of wood and food. This was all accomplished mainly through maintaining tree nurseries in the town of El Adelanto and in 4 villages and outplanting into the community. From 91 to 2008, he worked as a hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, chiefly in charge of research, development, and conservation of ground soils or ground resources. From 08 to 12, he worked with the Arkansas public school system. He taught high school math and science. From 2012 to 18, he worked with the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality as a geologist, determining the condition of soils and groundwater at hazardous waste sites in Arkansas. And he evaluated the measures being implemented to treat and restore contaminated soils and groundwater. So without further ado, my friend Dan.
All right, thank you, Mary. and welcome everyone. As Mary just read to you all, I worked in El Adelanto, which is in the eastern part of Guatemala, next to El Salvador. And part of Peace Corps' mission, there's really three goals, main goals. And one of them is to provide skilled assistance to help them with the quality of their life. And then there's the other two goals of understanding the people of the country, and in reverse, them understanding us as Americans, and in that understanding, have a better respect and trust in each other. So in El Adelanto, well, that's the town I worked in. I also worked in 4 villages surrounding El Adelanto. And as Mary said, I worked in agroforestry, which mainly involved putting in tree nurseries in El Adelanto and in those 4 villages. And I worked with a promoter there who worked with the Department of Forestry of Guatemala called DIJEBOS. And when I went there, other Peace Corps volunteers had worked there before me. And this promoter, he was very knowledgeable. I know Mary knows Manuel Corrado. He's very knowledgeable. He actually knew more than I did. So I felt kind of like, what am I going to do here? But I did find that I served in an organizational respect, and also motivation. You'll find that as a Peace Corps volunteer, people really get motivated just by you being there. And then also given another perspective of things while I was there. So we had these tree nurseries from about 500 to a few thousand trees, and we would outplant them mainly for the land that they had. Their corn and beans is the main crops they were growing on. It was very steep. It really wasn't made for farming at all, but these were poor farmers and they were pushed off onto these properties. So we would plant these trees along contours and on their farmlands, and very close together, within inches of each other. So they would provide a barrier to the soil from eroding, and also create an area where the water would stop and drain back into the soils and into the groundwater. So that was my main job while I was there. Also digging drainage ditches for the water to drain into the ground. But I also worked with other projects. We find when we work there that there's other needs there. And one thing that I saw was the springs that are very valuable for the villages and the town. Well, the town had a spring that was developed and water was piped into the town. So I had the privilege of getting 3 hours of water every other day through those pipes. But the villages had no piped in water, and they had no electricity either. So they would have to make the trip down to the spring, which could be miles, to fetch water and bring it back to their house for drinking and other purposes. But they also, while they were at the spring, went ahead and washed their clothes while they were down there. And then they would bathe also. Women and men would bathe there, of course, with their slips on, and most women with their bras on. But boy, back, in that type of environment, if women were breastfeeding, they wouldn't wear a bra. That was just the way it was, and you would get used to that. So they always liked it when the gringo took off his clothes and with his underpants and washed himself through there. It's kind of a social activity. But so that was the main things that I did to contribute to the country, and that was one of the main goals of the Peace Corps. In order to understand the Guatemalans and them understand me, it's basically just getting involved with the community and socializing, and the work. It did a lot of it at these tree nurseries. When we first put in the bags of soil, we would invite the village people to come in to help, and there would be kids, women and men, all maybe 20 or 30 would come in and help fill up the bags with soil, and then we plant the seeds and grow the trees, and they would have to be maintained through the season. So that was one activity that really integrating with them and working with them, that was really fun. And then it would help to go to the fairs, the weddings. Funerals were very important because they really respected a Peace Corps volunteer that went to the funeral and showed care for the people there. And other little things. I can remember most of all, when we brought in a movie projector, you know, the villages never, some people never even saw a movie. And we were bringing in these movie projectors and, or just one projector, and we had to bring a generator too because they didn't have electricity. And we were toted on these stretchers for a few miles to a town and show a movie. It was just the whole town would come around and watch a movie and maybe make some popcorn. But it's just a great way of getting to know the people of Guatemala and them to get to know me. And that was part of the mission of the Peace Corps too. And that brings us to the peace part of Peace Corps. And that is, you know, we can give money, we can give material goods, but we really don't trust people and respect people and think they're worthy of us giving to them until we really get to know them. And a good analogy to that is animals. A lot of people are afraid of different animals going into nature and what have you. And I was afraid of this bee on the back of my cabin a few weeks ago. It looked like a yellow jacket and it kept on buzzing around and hovering and looking at me. And I said, this guy's going to sting me. And then I looked on the porch one day and one was dead. I took a picture of it. It looked in iNaturalist, which is an app you can look at to identify animals and plants. And lo and behold, it wasn't even a bee. It was an imitation of a yellow jacket called a hoovering yellow jacket. And I'm like, it was a fly actually. And so, you know, once you get to know people, you get to know their religion, their race, you know, where they're coming from. That's what really brings peace. So I think the core of peace is where the Peace Corps is. And I guess I'll just end with saying, boy, I think if every politician was in the Peace Corps, I think we'd have a better world. And yeah.
Thanks, Dan. I like that story you told about that bee. That was nice. Thank you. Okay. Now I get the pleasure of introducing Glenn Broomhurst however I want, because I didn't get his bio, that it went to some other email of mine or something. So I got to make one up, Glenn. So here we go. Glenn and his wife, Kathy, she's an RN, which is great. Actually, she's a nurse practitioner, which is greater. They were both Peace Corps volunteers in Guatemala from 88 to 91. He's currently the president and CEO of the National Peace Corps Association. Glenn and Kathy have lived a life dedicated to service and travel. They have visited and or worked in 70 plus countries. Can you see I Facebook stalked you, Glenn? They visited 24 with their children. They visited each of our 50 states, but they still have 2 continents left to get to. There's always room for improvement, Glenn. They exemplify a life focused on international unity. And I'm so pleased Glenn was willing to speak today about his Peace Corps experience, his service, his thoughts on this day of international peace. And that's right, Glenn, Facebook stalked you. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, Mary. And I just, if you will, introduce all of you to what is known as Hora Chapina, which means Guatemalan time. I showed up late to the event. And if you've spent or lived any time in Latin America, sometimes you know that things don't always work on the hour as we might expect them here. But it was only because I actually inadvertently put the event in my calendar at the wrong time, but had this inkling feeling that we were actually on the same time zone and needed to show up. So I got here eventually, hopefully not too late. But I'm really just excited to be a part of this conversation this evening. Thank you so much, Mary, for the invitation to join you. Peace is what Peace Corps is all about, and that's why we need to be talking about it. I want to just segue a little bit there from some of Dan's comments. He mentioned that if every politician served in the Peace Corps, how much better things would be, and that's a really valid point. Right now, we only have one member of Congress who has served in the Peace Corps. That's John Garamendi from California. There have been times where we've had, even upwards of a dozen in both the House and the Senate. And that represents a good portion of Congress. And related to that, both in the House and Senate now too, probably an all-time low number or low percentage of members of Congress have a passport or have served their country in either the Peace Corps or military or in some form of national service. And I really do believe that service is the solution to many of the challenges that face our country in terms of partisanship and policies, and really taking care of those who most need the support that we can provide to them. So to that point, really just encourage your members of Congress to get their passports and get abroad and see volunteers in the field, see the reality of other countries, see why folks from Central America are immigrating to the U.S. because they're so desperate for safety and security and economic well-being. It's just so important. Myself, I came from a small farm community in central Missouri, and never left the U.S. before. My wife from Minnesota had spent a semester abroad, but we really had not seen the world at all in any means. And serving in the Peace Corps in Guatemala was just such an eye-opening experience, as it is for all of us. Mary and Dan and everyone else would say the same thing. It's a life transforming experience, and it really does change our perspectives and our horizons and our worldview, and creates such a different way of viewing things. I came back certainly, transformed in a way that was knowing that I needed to dedicate the rest of my life and my career to serving others and to really bringing about the friendships and understanding, cross-cultural understanding that are essential for world peace. And that's our ultimate goal, of course. In the background here, you'll see behind me, this is me in the Peace Corps about 30 years ago and about 40 pounds ago. So that's one impact of serving in the Peace Corps, at least for most men, is that we get a lot of exercise and eat well and have lots of parasites that help us keep our weight down. And that's not the case for everyone, just to say, but it was my case. And just a lot of outdoor activity, and this was with a family that I worked with in the work that I was doing in crop diversification, where we were kind of along the same lines as Dan's work, trying to get more of the land cultivated with crops such as avocado and coffee and other tree crops like citrus through fruit tree nurseries and the like. I've gone back a number of times to Guatemala and have seen the if you will, the long-term impact of the work that I've done, in particular seeing those hillsides still forested with tree crops. And I've seen the work of many Peace Corps volunteers working with DHEBOS and DHESA and other agencies down there in helping really just diversify incomes and provide for better protection and conservation of our natural resources through the work that they've done. And then just building friendships more than anything with the folks that we have built friendships with there. Mary knows, I guess she's on Facebook with me probably. She knows that we've got lots of folks. When I post something on Facebook, half of my respondents respond in Spanish. Most of them are from Guatemala. That includes the little kids that hung around our house every evening and wanted to play games and learn a little bit of English and just see what these gringos were like. And we really just built some strong bonds with them and their parents. So many of those little kids now have grown up and have reached out and been in contact with us. And they're just very, very grateful. They also have a unique perspective on the world thanks to our own experience. They see the U.S. through my eyes, not through the eyes of the television or other ways that they might think of it. So this really just helps build those better understanding that we need to have with our friends around the world. It's just so valuable. There's such a value in seeing the world through the eyes of others and understanding, for example, like I said, why migrants might come from Guatemala to try to be in the United States, or why climate change in Africa, just it compels individuals to migrate and find better opportunities. And these are many of the things that Peace Corps volunteers can help our host country nationals and the partners that we have there to address. So it's so very important. I would want to maybe just wrap up here with a quick story. After the Peace Corps, after Kathy and I served in the Peace Corps Guatemala, we stayed in Guatemala a few more years. Our son was born there, and then I went on to a career in international development with a couple of NGOs, and including in that was some some work that I did in Afghanistan several years ago. And this was, of course, after the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan, and I was visiting a place around Mazar Sharif, which is up in the northern part of Afghanistan, and I was meeting with some folks there who had been around, and one of them happened to be an Army colonel, and he said, "Look," he said, "down in Kandahar," he said, "we call it Little America down there," because he said it's so funny. He said, you go down there and everybody talks so well about America and the U.S. and the elders of the communities have great respect for the U.S. And he said, the reason why is it because he says that the Peace Corps people were there back in the late 60s and early 70s. And so he said, there's such a fondness there and a friendship, despite all the differences and challenges that we're experiencing here during this occupation, he said, for the United States. And that was really drawn more close to the Peace Corps community a few years ago through another story that came from Carl Eikenberry, who was the former commander of troops in Afghanistan under the Obama administration, was then appointed to be the ambassador to Afghanistan. And he's a lieutenant colonel in the Army when he was in command of troops there. And he tells a story himself of his own experience in Afghanistan, in which, as ambassador, the embassy had arranged for a visit to an area of Afghanistan where the prior week, I think some U.S. Marines had suffered casualties, and I think maybe a number of them had died, a dozen or so. And there was concern about the commitment of the U.S. To these communities and to continue to working with them. And the ambassador felt that it was important enough to make a personal visit out to this area, this community, to reassure our Afghan friends that the U.S. stood committed to continue to work with them. And he took his delegation out there, and as they landed, I guess, in a helicopter and approached the village where they were going to visit, and an elder approached them and started asking, some questions that they couldn't quite understand or couldn't comprehend why he would be asking. And through his interpreter, he understood that, this gentleman was asking for Jim, and he was asking, is Jim with you? Is he in your contingent? I want to see Jim, and kept insisting that Jim was with them. And Ambassador, kind of inquired around his group there and said, "Do we have a Jim in our group here? Anybody Jim that you know of, or who is he referring to?" And no, we don't. And eventually, the interpreter was able to deduce and question him enough to understand that Jim, he said, was Peace Corps Jim. And Peace Corps Jim was a Peace Corps volunteer who had served there many years ago, in the late 70s, mid 70s, I believe, early 70s, and who had apparently helped them develop a water project and some type of an agriculture project. And this village elder wanted to come thank him for that. And he presumed that he might be with this delegation of Americans that were visiting. So what Carl Eikenberry, Ambassador Eikenberry, reflected on later as he went to the Capitol Hill with us, with National Peace Corps Association, to advocate for more Peace Corps funding, he said, what impressed me so much in my time there and in this particular visit was that a week prior, we said that this gentleman 60 years ago or whatever, 40 years ago, had such a positive experience with Americans and was still experiencing the positive benefit and impact of the work that they'd done there, and had felt such deep gratitude for them that he wanted to express that to these individuals. And even though he couldn't find Peace Corps Jim in the group, he told the ambassador how grateful he was for Peace Corps Jim. And the ambassador said at the same time, earlier, 2 weeks ago or a week ago, we lost 12 Marines. And he said, nobody in that village will ever know their name. And he said, this is the power of the Peace Corps in building friendship and peace around the world. If only, he said, we'd had more Peace Corps volunteers back in Afghanistan, back in those days. If only we'd taken a different direction. Many of our approaches to peace building and the work that we can do around the world through the Peace Corps, would our world be a better place? And Ambassador Eikenberry has continued to work with us as we advocate. We're an organization that advocates for more Peace Corps more volunteers, more emphasis on peace building activities like that the Peace Corps can do. We are the people-to-people ambassadors, if you will, on the ground in these communities. We go where most folks don't go, where no diplomats and many development workers will not go. We live and eat and sleep and work right alongside, with our host country counterparts. We learn their language, we learn their customs, and we learn to like their food. And we really come back with our lives so much more enriched as a result of the experience. And that is really truly what's going to bring about lasting peace in our world. So if you've not yet served in the Peace Corps, I just hope you'll consider it someday. If you served, I want to thank you all, for those of you who have served in the Peace Corps, for helping make the world a better place through your service. And if you can in any way, whether or not you have been in the Peace Corps or not, make sure your member of Congress knows how important the Peace Corps is. With no volunteers in the field right now, Peace Corps is in a bit of a vulnerable situation for its funding and for its future. Faces a bit of an existential crisis. So I would just ask you to do your part by reaching out to your member of Congress, letting them know that you believe the Peace Corps is what we need more of, and that if we had invested like that, like we do in the military in Afghanistan, if we'd invested in the Peace Corps, the world would be a much greater place. So thank you so much for letting me share this moment with you. Happy to answer any questions if there's an opportunity later. And Mary, thank you again so much for the invitation to be with you.
Thank you, Glenn. Wow, I really want to get to know Peace Corps, Jim. That was a great story. All of those stories, great. Thank you. All right. So next we're going to have Emily Nguyen. She was fortunate enough to attend the presidential classroom during high school, where she served on the Iceland delegation in DC during a Model UN. Yay, UN. During college, she found a passion working in environmental conservation and spent much of her 20s and 30s working for the Student Conservation Association. Before serving with the Peace Corps, she was a Model UN advisor at an early college program for gifted high school students at Missouri Academy. Yay, Missouri. While serving with Peace Corps in Guinea as an agroforestry volunteer, she combined her passions of global engagement, environmental work, and empowering youth. She's now the Michigan Peace Corps recruiter. Yay! Excited about meeting the next generation of Peace Corps volunteers. So Emily, have at it.
Thank you, Mary. I'm going to share just a quick PowerPoint, mainly just because I get kind of, I don't know, I like PowerPoints in the sense of just being able to show you something besides my face. So, when Mary mentioned this, I kept thinking, okay, Peace Corps, peace, Peace Corps, peace. And it's one of those things of like, obviously there's a connection. It's like in our name. But the thing I kept going back to, and probably because of the United Nations connection, is I just kept going back to the SDGs, which, it's kind of like this fun game of like, you hear Dan's story, you hear Glenn's story, you're going to hear my story, you're going to hear Jenny's story, and you've heard Mary's story as well. And it's just one of those things of thinking, okay, how many of these did we hit during our service? And it's pretty evident that they're there in terms of what we're doing on the ground with our community members. So I just think it's cool to kind of think about how Peace Corps is working to empower our community to really meet these sustainable development goals, and how that kind of relates to, I realize number 16 does actually have the word peace in there. It was kind of put in a little bit later, but these all interconnect with, I believe, that standpoint of how we look at development and how development can work in areas where there's going to be conflict due to the lack of resources and due to the lack of ability at times to use those resources well. So just something to think about. I'm not really going to go into it more than that, but just kind of, I kept coming up in my head, so I just kind of wanted to share where my mind was going. And then beyond that, it's just going to be photos. So nothing too bad in that sense of a PowerPoint. But echoing a lot of what's already been said, I got to live in a community of 1,000 people. So I served in Guinea, it's in West Africa. I lived in a relatively small Korenko village, and I got to really be a part of that village when it came to the festivals, the things that were important, whether it's harvesting or making sure you look really good at a important holiday, and really being a part of that culture to understand it better. So on the flip side of that, and Dan did a really good job of kind of mentioning our 3 goals. I was the first Peace Corps volunteer in my village. And, my name gives it away. And also, the fact that I'm Asian American is not what most people are thinking of when they're going to get their American Peace Corps volunteer. So in that sense of being able to exchange, it's definitely what people get from the movies is not necessarily what is in fact America. So getting to exchange that, getting to talk about different, so Guinea is a Muslim country, and so getting to share different cultures on religion and although I'm Asian American, I grew up in a very Irish family, so just being able to share a little bit here and there of what makes us unique and maybe a little bit different than what people are thinking of when they think of America. So that cultural exchange. What I actually did, very similar to what Dan was mentioning, actually, and a little bit of what Glenn was mentioning, I will say what's fun about hearing other people's experience is how much things stay the same in Peace Corps. In terms of the different things that Dan was echoing, some of the same experience, even though I just served last year. So it's just sort of fun to hear other people's stories. But I worked with agroforestry as well. My big project was working with cashew plantation farmers. They wanted bigger cashews. I couldn't quite make that happen, but we definitely looked at the idea of increasing the yield. So from that, we looked at pollinators and really installing sustainable beehives. So we used Kenyan topper hives, and we installed them in 6 different cashew plantations to really increase that overall yield of a cash crop. And then working with youth. So the carpenter is Bakri, and he was one of my big champions in terms of not only working on the Kenyan topper hives, but also looking at what was disappearing from the forest. And so we worked together in terms of doing a lot of forestation ideas behind that, of the mahoganies and all the different woods that he was these are just disappearing. They won't be here for my children, and really working on that kind of angle. Amala is the lovely young boy in the center, and he was my partner in crime pretty much every single day. We were doing something together. And right there, he is working on a tree nursery. So much like what Dan was talking about, we focused on fruit trees because we were trying to bring in those pollinators. So lots and lots of soursop, just lots of jackfruit, lots of really just good fruit trees to really bring in those pollinators. And then also worked with some home gardens when it came to looking at extending the crops in terms of the vegetables, trying to extend that growing season a little bit longer to kind of increase that nutrient for families. And so these last photos, so the guy in the front center there that's wearing the lovely orange outfit, that is my host dad. And so the thing I think about with that is, not only just being accepted by this family and being welcomed into their community and, ultimate protectors, just everything I needed, these folks were there for me. But this man was really, really good about listening to me go off on my conversations of just asking so many questions. And a lot of what I would ask about was his viewpoints on the young women in the community, and especially relating that to education and how he saw just kind of the way the village worked and the way access was very much, as you see, these photos are all boys. These are who I usually were around, young men and young boys. And that is largely due to the fact that the girls were working. They didn't have time for me. They were off doing the chores. They were off, kind of being responsible for taking care of the younger children. Also too, so in Guinea, the national language, one of them is French, and then there's also local languages. There's over 20. I spoke Korenko, and typically speaking, the women and the young girls didn't have, the boys spoke better French, and so also because of that, I kind of naturally gravitated towards them because I came into the program already speaking French, but I was able to get by pretty well in Korenko. But nevertheless, these were the people that were around me, and so getting to have those conversations with my host dad in terms of how he saw things, not so much of really just wanting to explore the concepts of gender equality and how that affected young women and young girls in the community. But you'll notice, although I was agroforestry, and I think this is a pretty consistent Peace Corps story, I did a lot of secondary projects. And so tutoring the young boys when it came to multiplication and division, we did a lot of math nights where I was the one that had access to power. And so I was the one that kind of gravitated towards not only being a place to do your homework, but also someone that would be willing to help you with your homework. And then also doing teaching English as a second language, more on the fun side of just wanting to get folks excited about going to school and about learning and kind of changing that kind of concept of rote memorization and maybe not so much fun when it came to school. So trying to be able to really incorporate that. And then on the right-hand side, there's a young boy eating sogbet. It's like an orange fruit. And so this guy was my homolog son. This is Fode. And he was really good about always taking me out and just exploring the forest. But we were able to create like a really amazing seed bank in terms of gathering seed and gathering that seed, not only for the tree nurseries, but for other people to use as well. And so just kind of promoting the idea of like environmental stewardship with the youth in terms of like youth development. But with that said, so as Mary mentioned, I am the Michigan recruiter based out of Detroit. And so I will just open it up and let you know that I'm always around if you have any questions, not only about joining Peace Corps, which I will say it's never too late to join Peace Corps, but also if you're interested in having any kind of presentations done, whether if it's with Rotary, with your church, or with a school group, I'm always available to kind of facilitate that for you. I think one of the things about Peace Corps is that sometimes people know about it, sometimes people know a little bit about it, and it's just sort of that way of bridging that gap to plant that seed, if in case anybody does have that desire to serve and just maybe doesn't quite know how to get it going. I'm always welcome to be a resource for that. Other than that, thank you so much for letting me be a part of this amazing moment on International Peace Day.
Thank you, Emily. That was really interesting. I haven't heard a perspective of somebody, especially that served so recently. So that was fun to hear. Thanks. All righty. Next, we are going to have Jenny Spire. She's an RPCD from Chelsea here in Michigan, real close, who served as a TEFL volunteer from 2008 to 2010 in Kazakhstan. Yeah, I'm going to let her tell you where. During her service, she taught English at a local service. She led quarterly TEFL professional development workshops with rural and urban teachers, and she also led English summer camps in her own town and other areas of Kazakhstan. No, I said that totally wrong. Following her service, she worked as a project manager at the University of Michigan School of Education and as a history teacher in Detroit, Michigan. She currently works as an educational program leader at MSU Tollgate Farm, teaching youth and adults about the environment, natural resources, and agriculture. Thank you very much, Jenny, and correct all my misspeakings.
That's okay. Kazakhstan, and the city I worked in was called Kokshetau, which actually means blue-green mountains, is what it means in Kazakh. So thank you so much for the introduction. I liked, Glenn, how you put the picture in the background, so I decided to do the same thing. So I'll move so you can see me, but and the background came through. But that is a picture of me with my students, some of my students, because I had a lot of them. But in Kazakhstan, so I did live in a larger city, but I taught English. So part of my job was teaching in the city, but part of my job was also doing professional development with rural teachers. So I had a really cool experience that I got to work in the city, and then also, come in there. Sorry, got a kid. That's coming, of course. As soon as I start talking, they have to come in here, right? I got to teach the rural teachers also who had much more limited English. But when I would work there, I had the chance often to go to small rural villages, and we would often travel. It's common there to travel by bus across the steppe, and you would basically be driving for like a few hours and you wouldn't see a village or a person or anything. It's just nothingness. And so a lot of times halfway you would stop at a really small village and use like the outhouse, or if they had a bathroom, you would use it. And on one of these trips, I remember a man coming up to me. I would call him a dedushka, which just means grandfather, like the honorific. And he asked, "Are you an American?" I think he heard me speaking English. And I said, "Yes, I'm an American." And he said, "I've never seen an American before." And this wasn't the only time this happened to me. And we actually had a volunteer that had a man come up to him and ask him if he was an American and if he could touch him. And although by the time I served in Kazakhstan, it had already been 15 years since the fall of the Soviet Union and Kazakhstan's independence, a lot of people in Kazakhstan had no contact with any foreigners at all. It was a very isolated area of the Soviet Union. They had prisons there, they had resettlement programs there. They also had nuclear testing and the space program, so it was very isolated. And the Soviet Union, as we all know, told people that Americans were the enemy. And they had nothing to compare that to because they never met any Americans. So during my Peace Corps service, I was graciously invited into the lives of everyone that I met. And I have to say the people there are some of the most warm and welcoming people that I've ever met in my life. I was invited to weddings, birthdays, holidays, social events, just everything. I watched all the young people stroll in the square because that's kind of their area of what they do. They walk through the square and that's their fun thing. And a lot of times you would see the old men with their full Soviet uniforms on, with their medals on, strolling with their wives and their canes through the town and everything. I ate horse meat, which is the national dish. It's part of bishbarmak, which means like 5 fingers because you eat it with your hands. And I taught people there how to make carrot cake, which I love. And I, in general, like everyone said, I formed really long-lasting relationships. And I still maintain those relationships to this day. And one of the closest relationships that I formed was with my host mom. So when we first arrived in Kazakhstan, volunteers were asked to stay with like a host family for at least a year. So I stayed with my host family for a year and then I moved out. But my host family, it was my host sister was one of my students, and then her parents. And her parents were actually older than most parents would be in that country. They were probably, I would say, in their late 50s, and she was only 14. So they had married later in life and had her later in life. And my host mom and me, we got along well, but she was very opinionated. She would tell me all the time that I needed to get married soon because I was getting old. I wasn't even 25 yet. And then I needed to start having kids as soon as I could. She also would yell at me that I drank too much water and not enough tea, because tea is what they drink there. And we definitely didn't agree on a lot of things. We had very different views of the world. But, you know, I loved her as a second mother. And we cooked together, we hung out together. Her and my host dad were musicians when they were young. So he would play the accordion and she would sing. I mean, we just had a great time. And she was just an incredible woman. And I'm so thankful for that relationship. But, you know, what did we learn from getting to know each other? We learned that no matter who you are, like everyone's saying, no matter what ethnicity you are, no matter what religion you are, no matter what sexual orientation you are, no matter what political ideology you believe in, we all want the same things. We all want to be safe. We want to be fed. We want to be provided for. We want a home. We want our family to be safe. We just want to be happy. And so I think it's easy to hate someone you don't know. But when we know someone, when they share your life with you, it's much harder to have that hate. So for me, peace means those relationships. I think today in our modern society, you can't achieve that isolation that the Soviet Union had, but you still can be very isolated from people. And so I think the most important thing that we can do is to form connections with people. And with Peace Corps, I think, like I think Dan was talking about the 3 goals. I think the most important goal is the cultural exchange, because you can form those relationships over time, and then, you know, those are lasting relationships, and the people there remember that. And then maybe those people someday move up in their government or something, or in their local government, and they remember that. And I think those are the important things. And the only thing I wish is that everyone in America had the chance to go into Peace Corps, because I think there are so many people who have never been out of our country. And there are so many people in the countries where we serve that have never been out of their country. And so it's so important for that. So I would say in general that we might not agree with what everyone else thinks. We might not agree with everything that our host family or our counterparts believe in, but we all have that same humanity, and that's what's most important.
Thank you, Jenny. That relationship that you made with your host mom was really beautiful. That's a really great example of what the Peace Corps is about. I like that.
Yeah. Oh, and I should say, the reason I like this picture is because 3 of these students of mine I still keep in touch with. 3 of them, I'm trying to remember which ones. One of them lives in England, one of them lives in China, and one of them lives, where's the other one? In Germany, I think. And I still keep up with them on social media. So
Nice. All right, thank you. Thank you to all of you for speaking today. I really appreciated it, or I really appreciate it still. Emily had the Peace Corps office send a box of swag, Peace Corps swag, to me for gifts for people. So what I did is I spoke to my friend Scott Harris with Everybody Reads, and he agreed to have the swag at the bookstore. So if anybody would like a piece of Peace Corps swag, there's some tote bags, there's pens, there's world stress balls. You are welcome to go to Everybody Reads and pick out an item. Just let either Scott or Diane, who's over there, know that you're there for some Peace Corps swag, and they'll let you pick something out. First come, first serve. When it's gone, it's gone. So if you don't know Everybody Reads, please go by. They have new and used books, and you never know what you'll find. One of my favorite spots. Finally, consider joining us at Gluna. If you go to the Gluna website, there is a membership button there. We would be proud to have you join us in our quest for world peace. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you for our presenters, for their time. And I had to say this, go in peace. That's my Catholic upbringing. But first, we have Q&A time. If anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hands for any of the presenters. Or you can put your questions in the chat if you'd like to. And we'd love to answer any questions you have. I see your hand up, Miss Lynn. Speak
Hi.
away.
Hi. All right. Well, I just want to thank all of you so much for sharing your stories. It's just been wonderful to hear your experiences. And I was at first, the first few people had served in Guatemala, and I was interested to know how similar or different it was. And then, was it Jenny? You served in Kazakhstan?
Kazakhstan, yes, you got it.
And I appreciated the similarities that you shared. But Jenny said that she lived with people, with a host family for a year, or that's the expectation. Was that true in Guatemala as well?
You know, it always depends on the site that you go to. In Guatemala, we lived with host families for the first 3 months while we were in training. And we got training in language because there's a lot of indigenous languages as well as Spanish, depending on where we went. And we also got training in our the area that we would be working in. But then once you went to your site, you were responsible to find your own housing. And if there wasn't a house, because in some villages there isn't, then you would find a family to live with. So it really would depend.
Thank you.
We have a question about the countries that the Peace Corps works in. And I know Emily, as a recruiter, you probably get this question a lot.
Lynn actually nailed it. So right now we don't have anybody serving internationally. We do have evacuated Peace Corps volunteers serving here in the US, working with COVID related issues, largely with FEMA on the coronavirus. So first time ever having Peace Corps volunteers here in the US, but he did hit it. So before COVID, we had roughly 62 countries with volunteers, but we have served in roughly 141. I think he may have got those exactly on the nail. So, definitely we have to reevaluate which countries we're in, depending on what's going on. Just using countries near Guinea as example. Fortunately, we had to pull out of Burkina Faso and Mali just due to the political environment. But also Guinea actually had to stop in service due to the Ebola as well. So definitely it kind of ebbs and flows.
Yeah, and we do not, before COVID, we did not have volunteers serving in Kazakhstan any longer. It was suspended, I think it was 2 years after I left.
Hey, Glenn, could you speak to the issue of the question about U.S. presidents, and I might add even their families being in the Peace Corps?
Yeah, certainly. So far, no U.S. presidents have served in the Peace Corps, but they still can. There's no upper age limit, right? So maybe we can talk some of these former presidents into joining the Peace Corps, or future presidents as well. We think it'd be a good requisite for serving as the president. And then I see a question about budget down there. What does he ask for the Peace Corps budget for FY 2022? That's an interesting question. The administration, the Peace Corps itself, if you will, has presented a budget to Congress requesting flat funding for the Peace Corps for FY 2022, which is an interesting request. We advocated to the White House as well, and we had advocated to the president for a budget of FY 2022 budget of $450 million, and that would have been a $40 million increase over the funding of $410 million, at which the Peace Corps has been funded for the last 6 years. Now, that's the key note there, is that Peace Corps has been flat funded for the last 6 years, meaning if you account for inflation, its purchasing power, if you will, its buying power, its implementation of programs power is diminished because of the level of funding that it has remained stagnant. In addressing this, we have asked we've asked Congress, who controls the purse strings to the Peace Corps, not the White House, to increase the Peace Corps' budget in FY 2022 to $450 million. And this is based on several things. One is just to catch up for the inflation rate that has put Peace Corps so far behind in its funding. Two, to implement many of the reforms and improvements and changes that are going to need to occur in Peace Corps in order to redeploy volunteers in an entirely different setting and a different world environment than they were previously. I've heard from Peace Corps, the medical office, that even the medical costs for volunteers prior to their departure could triple as a result of the pandemic. And so there are also some reforms and some improvements that the Peace Corps community has expressed in town halls and other events that need to be implemented in the Peace Corps. Particularly included among them are greater diversity in the Peace Corps, and inclusion of people of color, better training to address systemic racism in the Peace Corps and other institutions where it exists, of course, and to implement improvements and changes to the programming of the Peace Corps on the ground, as well as the safety and security of volunteers in general, which is a priority of the Peace Corps. So many of these things come with additional costs to the Peace Corps. And there's also a piece of legislation right now called the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act of 2021, which has been introduced in the House. And it captures many of these reforms and improvements that are necessary for the Peace Corps and that have been raised by the returned Peace Corps volunteer community and others in particular. But all of those provisions in there, such as increasing the readjustment allowance for Peace Corps volunteers when they return from their service, or such as increasing the length of their federally funded medical insurance from 1 month up to 6 months, a variety of different things like that. If increasing the disability allowance for volunteers who come back injured or disabled and need to be on workers' compensation, all of those things come with a cost. And so we believe it's fully justifiable to increase the Peace Corps' budget by the $40 million that we're asking for, even though there are no volunteers in the field, right? It still requires Peace Corps to keep their offices open, keeping their program staffed, keep the recruiters going and working, and keep recruiting people and keeping them lined up and ready to go for whenever they can return to service, and making all those improvements that are going to be necessary. And if you will, the volunteers represent a relatively small part of the Peace Corps' overall budget because they're volunteers. They don't get paid much. But the infrastructure and operating expenses of the Peace Corps continue. And so Peace Corps needs continued funding, and it needs it at higher levels. So our ask has been $450 million for FY22, in contrast to the president's request of $410 million flat funding. And we have seen the House approve recently their budget for the Peace Corps at $430 million for FY 2022, which would be a $20 million increase, which is a step in the right direction and certainly good. We're expecting the Senate to also recommend and then approve a budget of the same amount or higher based on their previous commitments that we've seen many of them make. So I'm hopeful that eventually the budget for the Peace Corps for FY 2022 will be around $430 million or more. Of course, we're September 21st right now. We're not going to see a budget approved anytime soon. That means yet another continuing resolution. So that will essentially keep Peace Corps' budget on a continuum that it is right now. But we're hopeful that we'll see this budget increase, which would be the largest budget increase that Peace Corps has received in several years, if we get it through. So even more reason why you need to contact your member of Congress and let them know that they need to support Peace Corps funding. And I'll wrap up by saying, I think it was Jenny that said, we wish every American had the opportunity to serve. I really couldn't agree with that more. Every American, if at all possible, needs to serve their country. If at all possible, have the experience that we had in another culture and country, because it really is so life transforming. But even so, prior to the pandemic, Peace Corps had roughly 16 or 17,000 applicants per year for serving in the Peace Corps, and there really are only around 3,500 slots available because roughly 7,000 volunteers in the field means on two-year rotations means that there's only 3,500 slots roughly available each year. So if you can imagine, 17,000 people applying for 3,500 slots, even if you're well qualified, you could get turned away from serving in the Peace Corps. And imagine that, serving your country in the Peace Corps, you can't do it because there's not enough funding available for it. So we need to tell the Congress to fund the Peace Corps and expand it and improve it as they go.
I spent just about a month in Guatemala in the early 80s looking at the possibility of getting a grant to grow more vegetables and less corn and beans, actually maybe the same, between the rows of corn. And one of the things we had, because of insurgents, we had to have a gun by the drivers of the cars that we drove in. Was there any problem like that in Guatemala while you were there?
Dan, do you want to speak to that?
Was that Dan or Glenn?
Anybody?
Dan or Mary, go ahead. You had the same experience I bet I did.
When we were there, Dan, you remember in Glen, there were areas we weren't allowed to go to. They were off limits for volunteers. Maybe. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I because they were off limits, I never encountered any problems the 2 years, except for one encounter. The main problems we had was with the military. They would stop the buses, and sometimes some action would go on there that shouldn't have gone on. And there was a Peace Corps volunteer. Can't think of his name right now, but down in Monte Rico, he was stopped by some a bunch of military guys, and he was in the Vietnam War and knew judo and everything else. And he was in a stance ready to fight them because they pulled their guns on him. So, but that was the only incident I occurred in the 2 years that I was there. And, you know, that was peacefully resolved, thank God. But yeah, you just stay out of the areas that are troubled, and you usually do okay. Glenn, you have anything else?
Yeah, I think, you know, just in general, and things have changed over the years, of course. While Dan and Mary and I were there in Guatemala, the Civil War was still continuing, and you know, the peace accords were reached shortly thereafter. But now a different type of violence is kind of overtaking the country as well. It's a challenging place right now to visit. But nonetheless, you know, Peace Corps really does do their utmost to ensure the safety and security of volunteers. In Guatemala, they've implemented some pretty dramatic, I would say, protocols for the safety of volunteers, which include, for example, shuttling them if they arrive into Guatemala City, shuttling them up to the highlands area to Quetzaltenango in armored vehicles, if you will, and then they're able to disperse into their communities. Because the roadways in Guatemala can be quite dangerous sometimes. And the training center and the office of the Peace Corps were moved out of Guatemala City several years ago now, and out into a more rural area that's much less subject to the violence of the larger cities. So Peace Corps does well. They're certainly implementing protocols and procedures there to really ensure that volunteers stay safe. And the encounters, I had a few encounters of my own. I don't want to dissuade anybody from joining the Peace Corps by sharing any stories. I've been told I can't tell my interns stories anymore about my Peace Corps experience, but there are just things that will happen. They're part of the adventure, I guess I'd say. But if you're careful and follow the rules, I would say, you're going to stay safe. And that also comes from building positive relationships with your community, because your community and your host families and the people that you live and work with will really take care of you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Emily, I appreciate you bringing up Jimmy Carter's mother and grandson serving in the Peace Corps, and John Metzler. Also, you added that Paul Tsongas. I remember hearing about him, that he was a presidential candidate, and he actually served in Ethiopia in the 60s. So thank you for bringing that up. Hey, Emily, I wonder if you could answer the question of if a country has to invite the Peace Corps. I love that question because I think I like the way they do that.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that question. So yeah, we only serve in countries that have invited us to actually be there. And I think that kind of goes in this idea that, our mission is that kind of concept of peace, and not so much on terms of like going to places for other reasonings. We're definitely going there on the idea that they want us there, and they want us to be a part of that community on that level of grassroots, kind of working with the community to empower them. So yeah, we only go where we're invited. Somebody asked something about the ages, and I would just mention that our ages are only, we have a minimum age of 18, and there is no age limit. The reason I'm saying this is because it makes me think that a lot of the requirements that we do have are not necessarily Peace Corps. It's actually kind of connected to the visa requirements. So being able to justify having somebody serve in these countries where we're being invited, some of the requirements that you see on position descriptions, it's not so much Peace Corps, it's more so the countries needing to be able to prove that you are a qualified person to come over with that visa.
Yeah, I like when they invite Peace Corps volunteers to the country, they have specific job descriptions. So we're actually applying for a very specific job. So yeah. All righty. Well, I think we've answered everybody's question.
Mary, could I ask?
Yes,
make
you
a
can.
comment? First of all, to compliment everyone that's been involved in this Java Cafe. It's great. But I also wanted to, you can tell from my white hair and beard that I've been around for a while. I'm not a returned Peace Corps volunteer. I served with another religious-based voluntary organization back in the 1970s. But many of you who know me know that I was an academic here at Michigan State University in the African Studies program for 30 some years. And one of the things that impresses me with everybody that's been presenting tonight is a type of career that they had post Peace Corps. And this speaks to international programs at universities across the United States, and particularly here at Michigan State University. I think of what you might call the first generation of true internationalists here at Michigan State University in agriculture and education and healthcare, as well in the more traditional area study center, whether it be Africa, Asia, or Latin America. There's a sizable percentage of those early scholars who took leadership positions and built Michigan State into a leading international institution today, who were returned Peace Corps volunteers. Many of them who went into the Peace Corps with no academic background or training in their fields, in agriculture and education and allied health areas, are in area studies. And so the Peace Corps did a tremendous service to the academic community, and certainly from the perspective of Michigan State University, when I think of colleagues, there are 3 colleagues here at Michigan State when I got here in the mid 1980s, who were Peace Corps 1 or Peace Corps 2 in Ethiopia and served with Paul Tsongas. That's how I knew about that story. And they were leading contributors to building what is today a leading African studies program in the United States. Anyway, I think and that's not unique to MSU, and it's not unique to Africa, and it's not unique to international agriculture or international healthcare or education.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you bringing all that up. Well, if there are no other questions or no other comments.
There's a hand up, I think.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. And speak.
Okay, I think that it's my hand. Thank you. I think about Peace Corps and what all you've said tonight, and I think it's about the best bang for our buck that this country can get. And I agree with you completely that we need to call our elected officials. Glenn, you mentioned the budget. So should we be calling all our senators and our reps right now, or all of them?
Sure. And if you're familiar with kind of the support or non-support that your member of Congress has given, if they've supported Peace Corps in the past, be sure to thank them and don't overlook them because you think you just need to make an ask. It's always as important to thank those who've supported the Peace Corps as well as make an ask of them. And then the House has already passed their budget appropriations bill, so it's a done deal. The Senate has yet to recommend and pass their budget. So you can definitely call your senator, and then separate from that, and that's on appropriations for FY 2022. Separate from that is the legislation that I mentioned, HR 1456, which is a House bill, and I can put a link in the chat here a little bit later. HR 1456 is the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act in the House of Representatives. We have currently around 101 co-sponsors of that bill. It's a bipartisan bill, but barely. 101 Democrat sponsors and 4 Republican sponsors at last count, last time I looked. And so, particularly Republicans, if you happen to have a Republican in your district, I don't know in Lansing area who your member of Congress is, but if you have family or friends in Kansas or Missouri or somewhere too, call them and ask them to call their member of Congress because we need to get more Republican co-sponsors on the Garamendi legislation, as we call it, the Peace Corps Authorization Act. So that's kind of where we stand on the funding and that piece of legislation.
Thank you.
Thanks for copying that in there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone.